Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Heroux, and I'm one of the organizers for the Collegeville Workshop on Scientific Software for 2021. Today, we have Neil Chue Hong with us. Neil is widely known in the software research software field, probably the most notably for his work with the Software Sustainability Institute, but certainly in many other topics as well. His opinion, his insights are sought by many people in the international community. And it's a privilege for us to be able to have Neil join us and talk a little bit about a specific topic, FAIR for RS, the FAIR principles for research software. We had an earlier conversation a few days ago with three other leaders in this area, Michelle, Paula, and Dan. Their video is also part of this playlist and channel for the Collegeville Workshop. And so we spoke about a few kind of fundamental issues with them. And we're going to continue that conversation right now with Neil. Neil, first, maybe if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and then introduce what FAIR for RS, the fundamentals, mean to you. So again, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, my name is Neil Chue Hong. I am director of the Software Sustainability Institute, and I'm based at EPCC at the University of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. And I guess my interest in the FAIR principles has started from being involved in understanding what software might mean as a research output and the role that software plays more generally in support of research, but also as I've kind of gone forward in my role, understanding that software has these three different roles, these different capacities. So both being something that supports research as a tool, being something that might be the subject of research, so almost as a data set, and then also possibly being a research output in its own right, because it encapsulates something that we're trying to express or study, a phenomenon. So FAIR for research software is really interesting because it tries to extend the FAIR guiding principles, which were originally formed with data in mind, although the original authors had all sorts of research objects and outputs in mind when they were trying to define these and understand what it means for software. So what does it mean to have findable software? What does it mean to access software? What's it mean to have interoperable software? And what does it mean to have reusable software? Yeah. And I think one of the other interesting things is how much do the thresholds for making something findable, accessible, interoperable, or reusable differ between data and software because of their slightly different characteristics? A good example of that might be that with software, I actually think the barrier to making it available, for making it findable and accessible, is possibly lower than it is for data. You can do it earlier in the life cycle, and you can potentially do it with fewer requirements. So placing a license on it, having a good title. Is that all you need to make something findable when it's a piece of software? It might be. Just depositing it somewhere with the minimal metadata is probably good enough for software, and it may not even require deposit. So I think that's what's been really interesting as we've been defining the FAIR for research software principles, is understanding what are the differences and the similarities between software and data, and how much the FAIR principles might need to be changed or evolved or adapted, or, as you pointed out, extended. There may be some things which are not part of FAIR, but are important for software and should be enshrined in a FAIR plus something else as well.
Yeah, very nice. Very excellent comments. Thank you. So you pointed already to some nice nuances for the FAIR elements. What are some of the extensions that you are thinking about and colleagues with whom you work?
Yeah, so I have a quite privileged position because I was helping to lead the drafting and the community consultations. So I've got kind of quite a good viewpoint of the different perspectives on how FAIR might be extended. A few years ago, as part of the workshop on sustainable software sustainability, we held a session around FAIR and extension of FAIR for software. And there were some things that came out there that I think broadly represent the same things that were coming up in community consultations more recently. So there's some element which is around software quality. So I think obviously there are elements of quality for data and FAIR data as well, but they tend to be considered as part of interoperability and reusability. It's easier to define them in those categories. In software, there's a large existing body of work from software engineering about what it means for something to be of high quality as software and what that means for reusability. So I would say that one of the things that came up that was really interesting in the drafting of the FAIR for RS principles is this idea of, are you able to depend on a piece of software to do your research, whether that's creating a new piece of software that sits on top of it, or whether that is using the software. And I think that extends past reusability. Something can be reusable, but you might not be able to depend on it. Whereas dependability, given the way that the software ecosystem is built up of many layers, of many interacting connections, I think is much more important for software than it is for data. The challenge is how you sufficiently define it so that people can see whether criteria are being met. I think one of the key things with the FAIR principles and FAIR for research software is that if people can't see the steps to how they might adopt them and implement them, then they're not going to succeed. So likewise, I think for making dependable software, we need to understand what are the stages that people can work towards so that they have a clear pathway to very dependable software. And so some of these are the things that are kind of commonly known as good practice, the use of version control repositories, for instance, the use of testing and continuous integration. But other things might point to things that are more around what I call soft practice. So how is the governance of the software structured? Does that make it more dependable in terms of the sort of long-term reliance and so on? So I think there's a lot of really interesting things around dependability of software.
Please go ahead.
Another thing that's potentially interesting that's been coming up is around what it means to be accessible for software. So for data, accessibility is typically described in terms of, are you able to get to the data that you're wanting to use? So it's about protocols, it's about authorization, authentication, and the right to use. For software, it's all of these things, and that's how we've defined it in the FAIR for Research Software principles. But it's also got another it's got another definition that's commonly used in the software field, and that is of removing any impediments and barriers to being able to access a piece of software. And that's something that in the current draft of the FAIR for Research Software principles is not in scope. And there was a lot of discussion about whether it should or shouldn't be in scope. But I think it's something that definitely needs to be added as one of these extra principles alongside FAIR for software. And so being able to consider the adaptations required and the sorts of things that you need to do to make sure that software is accessible by as wide a variety of people as possible, I think is really important. Partly because some of the other research I've been doing is around equality, diversity and inclusion in the research software community. And one area where in general academia and certainly research software is very poor at just now is in enabling people, disabled persons, to have the same ability to do research as non-disabled persons. And if it seems almost shocking because it's so relatively easy to do this for software, unlike some of the physical equipment that we need to use in research, that we're not doing more of that. So I think accessibility is the sort of second thing that I would add to the FAIR principles.
Very nicely stated. Can you give a concrete example to help us see what you mean by accessibility for disabled persons?
Yeah, so for instance, one really obvious thing is, and we can see this from the fact that both of us are wearing glasses. So visibility of user interfaces and things like high contrast user interfaces are really important. But there are other things as well. For instance, the majority of software is written in the English language, and error messages are in English. They are there at all. There are other things that can be done to help with internationalization and localization to make it easier to use and reuse software. And perhaps that is accessibility as an extension to reusability. But simple things like making the licenses and the readmes available in other languages can be a real help in terms of the accessibility, in terms of a different type of accessibility of the software.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much. Very nice comments. I'm curious, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, that, well, a lot of the things that you were saying about research software are to some extent, probably, lesser so with data. But I'm wondering if in the dynamic of discussing software, you might have illuminated things that would, be more sharpened statements or more elaborate statements, even for data, because software as data may have some implications to, the more traditional sense of what FAIR is, and maybe it's allowed you to even illuminate what FAIR can mean for other types of data, non-software.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I've always believed that there's like a spectrum of both data and software, and there's a strong overlap in the middle. It's often said that the difference is, for instance, people say that software has many versions and evolves, and authorship evolves, whereas for data it tends to be very specific versions, and the authorship is well defined. Well, that's true for some software and for some data, but it's not true for all software and all data. And so there's a lot to be learned, I think, going both ways. And it's increasingly the case as we try and apply FAIR to objects which are more complex. So we see FAIR for workflows, FAIR for machine learning models, FAIR for executable notebooks. All of these three things combine software and data. And so the complexities that you have from both start coming in. I do think that the FAIR data principles are really kind of really well focused and work well for a large subset of data, but not necessarily for all data. And there are some things that could be done to extend and to elaborate on the FAIR data principles as well, now that we're now 8 years on from their publication, I think.
Yeah. And last question, then I'm happy to let you say things that you haven't said. So FAIR, those 4 principles seem to apply to all data, software, more, data sets, now you're talking workflows as also like as a special case. Do you see any particular new 5th letter that might come in and apply, as a fundamental in addition to FAIR going forward?
Personally, I don't. I think it's about the interpretation of those 4 letters and what they mean. So for instance, I mentioned dependability and quality, but I think actually the base letter for that is around reusability. If you don't have some minimum level of dependability and quality, you can't make it reusable. And so at the level of what I call the foundational principles, the F, the A, the I, and the R, I think those are appropriate. And whilst we could perhaps find another one, I don't think we need to. What I do think we do need to do is examine the guiding principles, the things that fall underneath those 4 high-level principles and understand how we make those into principles that can be understood and adoptable for different types of object. And there, I think there's still a lot of work that can be done. An example is there has been some debate and discussion around the role of preservation and archiving for data and software and other types of research objects. And I would argue that that probably fits within things like making it accessible and making it reusable.
Yeah.
But having said that, I don't think that the current guiding principles, the specific principles, go far enough to understand what should or shouldn't be done at different stages of an output's life cycle. So if you're talking about a script that you've created, what's the appropriate level of preservation and archiving? What's the principle you can use to say, this is what I should do to make it available to other people? Whereas if you have something that you've produced that's been published, that's created published results in a paper, what's the principle say about how you should make your software accessible at that point? So I think there's nuance that can be elaborated on in the principles, but I think the four original principles are at that level good enough for our purposes.
Very good, thank you. Just one other thought. I was thinking of, well, what recursive application of FAIR, it's for like FAIR for documents. Have you pondered that at all? And I mean, could we, in principle, apply the FAIR principles to the FAIR document itself?
Do you mean here the FAIR principles themselves, or like
the document that describes them? Right, the document. I don't know. I'm just winging it right now, and wondering if because in a certain sense, a document is a collection of data, and I don't know. It's just a thought that entered my mind. I don't know. Have you heard? And if you haven't, that's fine. I'm just curious.
I think you can. I think, as you said, I think that documents are simply textual data. And you can apply the FAIR principles to the FAIR principles, and I would say that's kind of going into the whole idea of what does it mean to have open access, what does it mean to have things like LOCKSS consortium, making sure that you always have access to the electronic copies of a document and so on. So I think you definitely can, and I think we should. I think the interesting thing is that we're probably already doing this, but under different names, and whether or not we just need to sort of show how those two things fit. One thing that we did discuss, and I'm still not sure how I feel about, is what happens then when you start linking these things together. So how much should you be saying that for something to be fair, the things that it depends on and relies on should be fair? Because on the one hand, idealistically, you want that to be the case, because otherwise it can't truly be fair, because you're not able to do the things that you should be able to do without using other things. And on the other hand, I think nothing can truly be fair, because there's always some level where something is not findable or not accessible, and certainly not interoperable. The sort of example we got for software was a particular issue is that we don't expect there to necessarily be interoperability between different pieces of software that are written in different programming languages. But theoretically, if you were to say that all dependencies must be fair for the thing to be fair itself, you might require that a library that's written that isn't meant to be used with something else must also be fair. I think there's a lot that could be done here on philosophy projects around the philosophy of fair and the logic of fair.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a great statement. Yeah, we can always benefit, I think, from colleagues in other fields as we go forward with our work. Well, Neil, any last comments before we wrap up?
I guess the last thing is to sort of just say that it's been a really great and eye-opening process trying to lead the drafting of this, and the way that we've managed to get so many great pieces of feedback and commentary from the community. And I'd encourage anyone who's watching this video to take a look at the Fair for Research software principles. And if you're thinking of adopting them, please get in touch with the Fair for Research software working group so that we can help you along the way. And if you don't know how you might adopt them, we'd be really keen to find out as well, because as I mentioned, I think the key to the success of the FAIR principles is making sure that people always understand the steps ahead of them for where they should be going next to adopt them. So yeah, please engage with us, and we're happy to hear your feedback.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you for a great conversation. I appreciate all the points you made. And hopefully from this video and then the subsequent conversation during the Collegeville workshop, we can make more people aware of FAIR 4RS. I think there's still a bit of awareness building, at least in the United States. In my communities, we need to build a better awareness of the activities around FAIR 4RS. It'll benefit everyone if we can. So thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Yep.